Music is, I'm sure many of you will agree, an art. Can the tools that we use to listen to music also be an art? Well, let's talk about that in today's video. I'm reviewing the Noble Van Gogh. This is a 4-driver IEM with shells designed and inspired by the Van Gogh Starry Night painting. Let's get it. What's cracking, audio fans? It's David here from Prime Audio Reviews. I'll just move the box aside so you can feast your eyes on the Noble Audio Van Gogh, and those are the shells. You can see right away they are pretty small. Just for context, let's have a look next to the Zigat Arcanus. So yeah, there's quite a difference there. So pretty small IEM. By the way, the price of the Van Gogh is $699. Yes, that is a pretty big chunk of cheese for an IEM. But if you're familiar with Noble Audio, that probably isn't much of a surprise to you. They do tend to make premium flagship priced IEMs, many of them reaching into the multiple thousands of dollars. So we've got 4 drivers inside of these, 1 dynamic driver and 3 balanced armatures. The bass obviously is handled by the dynamic driver. The mid-range is done by 2 Sonyan balanced armatures, and the treble is handled by a single Knowles balanced armature. Now obviously I test a lot of IEMs, hundreds and hundreds the count is at now, but honestly the Van Gogh here is one of the most comfortable IEMs I've ever tested. These just fit beautifully into my ears. They also offer pretty good passive noise isolation considering how small they are, but yeah, they are super comfortable. And thanks to the somewhat lengthy nozzles and just the overall shape, I was actually able to use the stock ear tips, and they were large enough, or they are large enough for my ear canals. Thank you, Noble Audio. I love it when that happens. But let's have a closer look at the design now and just look at those. So yeah, these design is inspired by the Van Gogh Starry Night painting. And whether you like that or not will be purely subjective. I think they look pretty cool, but as I've said in the past, I don't care too much about how an IEM looks. I'm more interested in the fit and most importantly, the sound. So without any further ado, let's dive into the sound. And I'll start by saying that these are easy to drive. You don't need a powerful amplifier or a DAP, just plug them straight into a phone even, or any low powered or budget dongle DAC will do the trick. However, if you're spending, $700 on IEMs, you've probably got some decent audio sources to plug them into. But getting onto the actual sound now, look, right from the get-go, it's pretty obvious that the Van Gogh here was not created to please the graph fanatics out there or the neutrality purists. This is an IEM that is made for immersive listening straight up. So no beating around the bush. This is nowhere near neutral. It is a very musical, what we call musical IEM, meaning it has a colored sound tuned for engagement. It's rich, it's contrasting, it's expressive, just like the painting that inspired it, if you will. But I will throw up the graph for you there, and you can see that compared with the Harman 2019 in-ear target, and you're probably thinking, Basshead? And, well, yeah, you could be right. It's certainly got more bass presence than the Punch Audio Martillo, which was actually labeled as a Basshead IEM, but the Van Gogh here has got impressive sub bass, and it's got a full meaty mid bass and upper bass and lower mid range as well. So it's all full bodied, forward, fairly thick notes in the lows. But at the same time, there's also a balance in the overall presentation. So the bass doesn't, I wouldn't say it dominates, it doesn't drown out the other frequencies. What it does is it lays down a fat foundation to support the mid-range and the treble. So bass guitars are nice and textured, but despite the fullness of the bass, there are distinct layers in the bass notes, so separation between bass guitars, bass synths, and things like double bass from kick drums, it's all distinct and clear, which leads me to believe that the tuning is extremely well crafted and the driver, the dynamic driver, is of very high quality. The sub bass is powerful, it rumbles with authority, but it doesn't really ever sound overpowering. It's not too much. The mid bass is meaty and rich. It's got a full bodied sound. It's got nice impact and slam. And despite the size and presence of the bass, it is still tight and controlled. It's got good texture and just overall is a very high quality kind of bass. But obviously, if you are a neutral head going for sort of a really flat or lean sound signature, then you should steer well clear of this one. So the mid-range is quite interesting here. We've got that enhanced bass paired with an elevated treble at the other end, and they sort of act as like bookends supporting the mid-range, which is in the middle. But that treble tuning is very important because with such a full low end, if you don't have an elevated treble, the mid-range can very easily become too warm or too forward or sort of veiled and thick. But what we get here with the Van Gogh is a smooth and full sounding mid-range. It is slightly pulled back in the mix, so it is slightly recessed, but it doesn't sound hollow and it doesn't sound too distant. But yeah, it did have to be pulled back a little bit just in order to compensate for that elevated bass level. But despite that, it has a nice clean presentation and it balances the powerful bass with that sort of lifted, boosted, sparkling treble. So male vocals and string instruments sound nice and rich. Female vocals don't have as much power, but they do have sufficient presence and they sound nice and clear and natural. They've got excellent detail and a nice sort of sense of airiness to them. That is thanks to the upper mid-range being sort of, like I said, pulled back a bit. Which also means that the upper mid-range isn't shouty in any way, at least to my ears. And then the treble is lifted, like I said. That's very important in keeping the mid-range clear and articulate. Without that sort of lift in the treble, the sound could easily have been too smooth and too warm, with the sort of bass just dominating everything. But instead, the treble adds some nice bite and energy. It gives the overall presentation a more lively character, sort of a V-shaped character. The tone sits a little brighter than neutral in the highs, but it doesn't come across as harsh. And it's not the most natural treble I've ever heard, but it does carry good definition and air. And that will lead on to the technicalities from there, and I will say the soundstage isn't particularly large or expansive, but it is not confined either, and that is again thanks to that treble tuning, which is quite forward and energetic, but at the same time smooth. It doesn't have any sharp edges. I found the imaging to be quite precise. I've done quite a bit of gaming with these, which is, a bit naughty considering they're $700 IEMs used for playing computer games, but it is a great way to test soundstage and imaging, and these perform in that regard very well. In terms of instrument separation, they perform really, really well. The overall resolution is great. Of course, some of the finer details are covered over a little bit by that impressive, powerful bass. But at the same time, I am still quite impressed with the detail retrieval on these, like even micro details. You can still pick them up, not quite as clear as some IEMs, but definitely better than you would expect when you see how much bass there is coming through on that graph. And coming back to that graph for a second, I know it looks pretty outrageous in terms of bass, but to my ears, the quantity of the bass doesn't quite fit with how it looks on the graph. Like, it doesn't sound that emphasized when you actually listen to it. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just something to do with the way they sit in your ears. But yeah, although the graph might suggest it's all about the bass, it's really not. There is, like I mentioned at the beginning, there is a balance. Alright, time for a little comparison now. I don't have a whole lot of IEMs in this price range to compare with. However, I do have the Meze Advar, which comes in at the exact same price of $699. However, the Advar here has just one single dynamic driver compared to the quad drivers of the Van Gogh. As you can see there, the Advar is even slightly smaller than the Van Gogh. In terms of comfort, pretty close, though. This one, the Noble, just feels a bit more secure. It sort of feels that concha area of my ear better, whereas these kind of just sit in there. But they're both very comfortable. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention the cable. Now have a look at the cable. It comes with a 4.4 millimeter balanced termination. It is this lovely deep teal color, and I think it suits the IEMs really well. It's a beautiful cable. It's a bit of a shame that the termination isn't modular, so if you want to use a 3.5 millimeter plug, you'll have to swap the entire cable out. However, I think this is a beautiful cable, and it suits the IEMs perfectly. But coming back to this comparison, the Advar has got less bass impact, so it's got an overall sort of lighter note size and sort of thinner note weight. It's less forgiving with poorly recorded tracks, and that's due to a couple of things. It's due to having less bass, but also a significant peak at around 6 kilohertz. So if a recording has sibilance on it, like if it's a bad recording with particularly annoying sort of S's and T sounds, then it's going to be more painful listening on the Advar, whereas the Van Gogh sort of remains fairly smooth over most things. So the Advar is more edgier. It can verge on fatiguing with certain types of music or certain recordings and instruments. Things like high piano notes can get a bit painful on the Advar if you're listening to them up loud. But having said that, the Advar does have slightly better detail retrieval, slightly more spacious presentation, and overall a thinner note size. But anyway, let's come back to the Noble Audio Van Gogh, and to sum it up, look, I really love these things, and I might have not made that clear up until now, but I really enjoy listening to these. They are so much fun, but at the same time, you don't feel like you're missing out on any sort of technical performance. There's no drawbacks really in the technical performance. Like I said, the detail retrieval is surprisingly good, and even micro details I was able to pick up just about all of them on these. And at the same time, you get this sort of really energetic, really boisterous, fun bass that is well forward and thumps and pumps, but it is controlled. It doesn't distort even when you turn the volume up, and it doesn't bleed over the mids too much. Like, it definitely does add some color to the lower mid-range, but it doesn't dominate. And I just find them really immersive and engaging, super fun, super comfortable. I absolutely love these. So if you have a sort of a bigger budget for an IEM and you're looking for something that's really musical, not neutral in the least, but really musical and just very enjoyable as a daily driver, I can definitely highly recommend the Van Gogh here. I enjoy this more than the Noble Knight. The Noble Knight is a more mids forward IEM, but it doesn't sound as dynamic. It's certainly not as fun or detailed, by the way, as these ones. Having said that, it's time to wrap it up, so thanks for watching the video. If you like this, give it a thumbs up, Pa Family Audiophile style, and if you're new here, hit that subscribe button before you go, and until next time, I'll see you later.